right, here we go. Friday, April the 10th. Thus far, we've talked about these parts or these classifications of drugs. So we've already talked about stimulants. We can erase that. Yesterday, you guys should have went through hallucinogens, even though there wasn't a video for that. All right, and so today we're going to talk about opioids. All right, so opioids. Here we go. Let's understand this. Most opioids are not produced. We can't grow something called an opium plant, which is typically a poppy seed that's planted and grows into a powerful plant that causes a plant that causes a powerful narcotic. Let's explain this here. You need very warm types of climates that we here in the United States really don't have to be able to produce things like heroin. All right. We have to oftentimes get that from other countries. Well, what are other countries that can grow those opium plants? Well, number one of the biggest countries is Afghanistan. You might find it from Mexico or Iran. You might find it in some different parts of the country, but those are the ones that will produce it more often. So what do we have here? So you take a poppy seed and you plant it, and it forms into this opium plant. So I got this foosball table to help me hold this while I do this. So as a field of opium plants are growing, somebody, after it's ready to be able to produce the powerful narcotic, what they'll do is they'll take this plant and they will just make slices into it. They'll just make cuts. And then there will be a sap that comes out. Right? The sap has to harden. It'll dry up, turn a little bit of a darker color. Right after a couple hours, somebody, whether it even be an adult or even a kid in some of these countries, they will come by and they will take a simple bucket and they will scrape the sap into this bucket. This is the powerful part that creates heroin. All right, they'll mix it in with several different types of chemicals, but they'll just take this sap. Okay, I just have this little post-it note, but they'll take the sap, scrape it, put it in a bucket. Go down to the next one, scrape, put into a bucket, scrape, put into a bucket. All right, add a bunch of chemicals, and then they ship it over here to the United States. Well, why do they send it here to the United States or certain parts of Europe? Well, that's where we have money. You know, Afghanistan really doesn't have the problem of having heroin epidemic because they just don't have the resource and the funds to it. So they send it here to the United States where we pay a lot more for it. All right, so let's understand why heroin is here in the United States and why mainly, let's concentrate this, why is it here in Northern Kentucky? Okay, we drive down the road, we see Northern Kentucky hates heroin. We hear that it's the biggest problem in Northern Kentucky, which it is. Let's understand this, and it's really kind of hard to explain. So I gotta talk about this on two fronts. Okay, let's talk about this one first. You had a company called Purdue Pharma. They made something called oxycodone, okay, or Oxycontin. That's the brand name, but it's oxycodone is the drug. And they produced this back in like around 1996, somewhere around that time. And what they claimed to doctors, they said this is a better pain reliever and it's less addictive than other types of pain medicines, your Vicodins and your Percocets. And that caught doctors' attention. They're like, great, man, we have a better pain reliever that's less addictive. And so they started prescribing these. Well, Purdue Pharma would also give a kickback to the doctor based on the number of prescriptions that they would give out every month. Okay, so if a doctor hit a certain quota, maybe they would receive some type of kickback. Maybe it would be I'm making this part up, maybe it'd be a gift card. If another doctor hit a certain quota, maybe they would get luggage or whatever the case is. So they were getting constant rewards and kickbacks. All right, so keep that in the back of your mind. Which end up being illegal, by the way. Government stepped in and said, no, doctors, you cannot get kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies. Then you also had, at the same time, 9/11 hit. All right, so when our trade centers got hit and our economy for the next months and even years went into a recession. When a recession happens, people do not make large purchases. Well, what don't they buy? Homes and cars. So let's understand the cars. The reason why I'm standing out here in front of these Michigan signs is because we're going to talk about the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit is the largest automobile manufacturer. All right. So when there was a recession, when people weren't buying cars, there was a ton of people that were being laid off of work. Okay. So these people throughout the Midwest, even Detroit and Chicago and places like that, they were having to disperse. They were having to find other jobs in other parts of the country. So think about this, going back to what the doctors were doing. They were prescribing narcotics, pain medicines to a bunch of people. When the government came back and said, no, you cannot prescribe this or else you might lose your license, well, doctors stopped prescribing it. Well, when doctors stopped prescribing it, well, you might have had somebody that was already hooked. They were already taking Oxycontin for various reasons. Because remember, doctors were told this is less addictive than other types of drugs. So there's way too many people that were taking oxys. So maybe I was coming up with a chronic back. Maybe I was a construction worker. And I went back to the doctor and I said, hey, doc, I need some more of those Oxycontins so I can go to work this week. And now all of a sudden, they're not allowed to give them Oxycontins. Now, if I was a construction worker, I might have to go find a different alternative because that doctor is not going to give that to me. So I had to find a different type of pain reliever. Well, I know the other type, if I can't get it from a pharmaceutical company, all right, I can go get it on the streets. How do I get it from the streets? Heroin. Heroin is a powerful opioid. It's a powerful pain reliever. So now you have a bunch of people going to getting hooked on heroin, okay? Now that doesn't really explain how it got here to Northern Kentucky. So now let's go back to the 9/11 issue. When the city of Detroit lost so many residents, well, they also lost so many clients. The drug dealers lost so many clients in terms of who they're selling their dope to. So they would have to disperse themselves. So instead of, if you know, just geographically, if you look on the map, what is the state that's directly below Michigan and the city of Detroit? Well, it's Ohio. Well, so you started having a bunch of drug dealers going into Toledo, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati. Okay? Now, drug dealers might be corrupt and everything, but they're not dumb. Right? So they also know the laws. And they could be selling their dope, and in this case, heroin, in Ohio, or they could be a little bit more intelligent and say, oh, let's just drive a few extra miles, go across the Ben Spence Bridge or the Big Mac Bridge and go into Newport and Covington, and now we're into Kentucky. Well, at that time, Kentucky's laws were a lot more lenient than Ohio laws. So a drug dealer says, well, I could go sell my dope in Kentucky, and now if I get busted, I'm not going to have as many fines, and I'm not going to serve as long of a jail sentence. So let's go peddle our dope there in Newport and Covington. So they did. So now you had a bunch of people here in Northern Kentucky that's hooked on heroin. And it's like the analogy. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to get it back. So right now we're constantly in this fight with heroin. And we're still in this fight today. And it's going to be a long process for us to get out. Now, Northern Kentucky Hates Heroin, they did an amazing job. Okay, you might have heard that correlation or that group, that organization. They went to our legislators, to our lawmakers, and they said, hey, if you don't make our laws tougher, if you don't make them as tough, or if not tougher than the bordering states, people are going to constantly come into Kentucky and sell their dope. So luckily our legislators did listen to them. And now Kentucky laws they meet or exceed all of our existing states that border us. So Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri, all those types of things. So it kind of gives you a little bit of why heroin is here in the United States and how it's actually affected here in Northern Kentucky. So if you ever get asked why is it so powerful or why do we have that problem here, now you know. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. There's a couple videos to go along with this video. I'd love for you to watch. It's not mandatory, but they are really powerful. Hope that you enjoy it, and as well as I'm going to put a little bit more extra information on there. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and we will catch you back next Monday. Take care.